Tony, why can't we trust the market to adjust to the energy sector disruption we're witnessing?
Well, in some ways, the peculiarity of the situation is the market is actually working very efficiently, and the commodity gas is finding its way to the highest price, people who are prepared to pay the highest price, and those people are Europeans who are in desperate need because of the Ukraine war and what's happened there. So that means that the consequence of this means that Australia's economy and Australian consumers, both businesses and households, almost become roadkill on this market, and that's just not acceptable. And markets are not things that should be left to themselves. I mean, there's a thing called the free hand of the market, but good markets are markets that are created by government and are well regulated, and they deliver what we want. So there is a role for government when the market is acting in a way that's not in the interests of consumers or taxpayers to produce an outcome. And that's why I think government have a very strong reason to intervene, but they must intervene in a way that directly affects the issue we're talking about, does not become long-term structural, and doesn't affect Australia's reputation as a reliable supplier of commodities such as LNG to the international world. And that's where I think, that's why it's become more difficult for the government to come up with a decision quickly, because there are a number of parameters they've got to satisfy, recognising that intervening in markets is always undesirable, but sometimes it's necessary.
So, Tony, when you look at those options that are on the table, it seems likely the government will reserve Australian gas for Australians at a capped price before those resources companies can sell it overseas for those big profits. That's good for businesses here, isn't it? But does it actually do much to the typical household bills in, say, Queensland and New South Wales?
Look, I think I'd be very surprised if the government was to introduce a form of reservation policy. I think it's a very clunky way to do things, and it was designed in Western Australia for a very different time, for a very different purpose. I don't think the government's inclined to introduce a windfall profit tax because it would be a relatively simple thing to calculate, but then the government would have to worry about distributing the tax. And the government's not about to introduce support or direct subsidies for consumers either, because that would be inflationary and the government's budget wouldn't stand it. So you're left with intervening directly in prices. And if the government does affect only directly the prices of the gas that is being supplied to the domestic market from the international LNG producers, they've already committed to supply that volume to the market. So we're not talking about taking volume away from those export contracts. That's already been agreed. It's the price. And so if you directly affect that price, it's that portion of gas supply that's flowing right through the current gas and electricity markets and pushing those prices up, and is the one that's projected to push those prices up for end consumers in the near future. That's where we have to intervene. And if we do it well, and there are things, there's a couple of things the government can do in that area of targeting that price through the heads of agreement, for example, with the producers, that would do all those things I'm talking about. Of course, what we're actually doing to do is take from the producers what's been described as windfall profit from them and supply that money effectively to the consumers by reducing their prices. That's what we're going to do. Let's not be clever about it. That is exactly what we're going to do, and that's what I think is the right answer.